Hello, everyone. I'm the Executive Director of the National Council of Jewish Women. This is the organizer of our event. And our event is supported and co-sponsored by the International Alliance of Women and United Nations Association San Francisco. Thank you to our co-sponsors. Women Behind Bars Reclaiming Their Lives, Call for Action. This is our topic today. We have great speakers and we'll have Q&A at the end of the session. I want to say a few words about the organizer of this event, the National Council of Jewish Women, San Francisco. This is a grassroots organization of volunteers working to advance the rights of women, children, and families and support them with programming, lobbying for new legislation, and extensive advocacy action. We are very proud to address today a very important issue for women. And we are grateful that we are supported by the International Alliance of Women, another organization that focuses on women's rights, and of course, United Nations Association, fully focused on human rights. I'm very pleased to invite now Alison Brown, the president of the International Alliance of Women, to deliver opening remarks. Alison, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Antonia. As she said, I'm Alison Brown, president of International Alliance of Women. We are an umbrella organization of feminist activists. We were originally conceived in 1902 and founded in 1904, making us the oldest political women's movement in the world. And I'm so happy that 121 years later, 122 now, we are still alive and kicking. We concentrate on lobbying at UN offices and at regional government colloquiums like the Council of Europe, or we observe at the Arab League or the African Union. We have representatives in all the UN offices. We have representatives at UNESCO, ILO, and other FAO. And there are going to be reports from all those places to be read on our website, womenalliance.org. This is a very important topic. We have found out that the number of incarcerated women is rising year for year. In fact, incarceration among women is rising at 34%, whereas incarceration for men is only rising 6%. Of course, we women start from a much lower level, but even with this great rise, we wind up with a lower level. Of the total prison population, we're about 6%. And many women wind up in prison doing things that are criminalized, but they are things that they're doing to stay alive, like selling food on the street without a permit. And they wind up in jail, and yet this is how they're putting bread on the table for their own families. The other thing is, many women in prison are not the originators of the crimes that they are doing time for, but rather were condemned for not turning in a significant other in a timely fashion. Many are also under the influence of addictive substances. Some women, when they get out, similar to men, have nowhere to go, being shunned by their families when they need them most. Release programs are essential, but also programs during their incarceration that connect them with the outside world and healthy attitudes towards themselves and their futures. I look forward to this discussion greatly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alison. I should mention that I'm Secretary General of the International Alliance of Women, proudly. Thank you for your support for this event. I'm now pleased to invite Ashley Ravice, the President of the United Nations Association, San Francisco, to deliver opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Antonia. Thank you, Allison, for your very informative table setting for this conversation. As you mentioned, my name is Ashley Ravice. I am the president of United Nations Association of San Francisco and convener of the Ratify movement. I'm joining you today from the 70th conference on the UN Commission on the Status of Women here in New York. And I am really pleased to have community with you all. UNA San Francisco acts to inform, inspire, mobilize people in the US to support principles and vital work for global peace and security, looking at that through the lens of dialogue and intervention, not war. We encourage the US leadership to work constructively with the United Nations in order to achieve the goals of the UN Charter, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and Sustainable Development Goals. At the subnational level, UNA San Francisco launched the Ratify movement. We structured this program under UN Security Resolution 1325, Women, Peace, and Security. The Ratify movement program provides a virtual platform to discuss the intersectional and intergenerational nexus between CEDAW and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Today's conversation, Women Behind Bars Reclaiming Their Lives, is especially important to me, as I have worked to eliminate the systemic barriers in the criminal legal system throughout the United States. What I have found is the criminalization of trauma and gender identity are the major drivers of incarceration in the United States, with up to 90% of people incarcerated in women's prisons reporting prior emotional, physical, and/or sexual abuse. These underlying circumstances are compounded with the use of felony murder laws, which produce especially unjust punishments for women whose criminalized acts are often coerced by intimate partners. Felony murder laws require a minimum sentence of life without the possibility of parole, regardless of their role in the crime or intent to do harm. In fact, foreign jurisdictions increasingly recognize felony murder laws as violating the fundamental principles of justice and proportionality. However, in the US, only 2 states have abolished the systemic miscarriage of justice, because no one should be re-victimized by the criminal legal system, sentenced to a crime they did not commit, other than a crime of being a woman. I would like to thank our panelists who will share their approach to survivor-focused violence intervention strategies that can be applied for both prevention and reintegration of incarcerated people. And with that, I bring it back to our panelists. Thank you so much for your timely topic today at CSW 70.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Thank you for the support of the United Nations Association. And I hope you will stay with us as long as you can. You mentioned you're in New York still, participating in person in the forum. And now I want to ask, we have close to 50 people here in the chat. How many of you are still in New York? Can you raise your hand if you're still in New York? Quite many. That's great. Thank you for representing us. I just came back from New York. It was very inspiring, as always. And now I want to ask how many in the chat are from the European countries? Can you raise your hand? And how many of you are from the African countries? Well, we do have Africa represented. How many are from the Asian countries? Wow. We do have. Meenakshi is here. So we have quite a good group here. And in the questions and answers part of our event, we'll probably hear some comments on the different continents and how the topic is being addressed there. Now, I'm pleased to introduce our panel. I'm operating the chat, so I will pin all of them so you can see them at the beginning. And pin. Today with us are Sonny Schwartz, and Sonny is writer, advocate, nationally recognized leader in criminal justice reform. Thank you, Sonny.
Thank you.
Rebecca Jackson, Vice President of Reentry and Public Affairs at Community Forward San Francisco. Thank you, Rebecca. Andrea Simino, Director of Research, the Regilla Project at Stanford Criminal Justice Center. Thank you, Andrea. And Ruhia Yusuf, she is a member of the International Alliance of Women, and she is solicitor in UK, working with the Women's Center in Brighton. Thank you all so much. I will start with Rebecca. Give me a moment to remove the pins. And Rebecca, you have a unique perspective, and you can speak from an angle that very few can present about, because you're also a leader, very inspirational in our community as a formerly incarcerated woman. Can you share barriers to your reentry journey after serving time in prison? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello, and yes, I can. I would like just to take a couple more minutes to sort of set the stage on the work. So not only VP of Reentry for an organization, but also sit on the San Francisco Reentry Council here in the city. I also co-chair the San Francisco Women's Housing Coalition. It's a collaborative of around 20 women serving orgs in the city, with the sole focus on my work being about women reentry and their journeys through homelessness, addiction. And I spent around 16 years cycling in and out of jail and prison. I went in the first time I was only 16 years old. And in the cycling in and out, and also I am the second of 3 generations of women who identify as survivors of violence. I am formerly addicted. I am formerly homeless. And so when I'm speaking about this experience, it is with the lens of how all of these things come together, and they all of those individual things become barriers to sort of being able to get our lives back together. And when Miss Allison and Miss Ashley were speaking, they were saying my statistics. They were saying my story. They were saying my experience. And I think it would be easy for me to say that some of the hardest barriers for reentry would be the obvious things like barriers to accessing housing or the inability to get a job, right, and be employed, which are two very basic, vital things that any human needs to be able to build their life, regardless if they've been in prison. Those are basic needs. But from my experience and based on all of the trauma that I had throughout my life, I think the biggest barrier to my reentry, and I will just say, I am forever indebted to the opportunity to reenter as I was allowed or I was granted the ability to go to a program as an alternative to returning to prison for the third time. And that program saved my life. So I'm indebted for that opportunity to begin the reentry journey. But what I will say about it, and what I know from working in the field and working with women, is that my reentry experience was male dominated. And I entered into a program where men were 20 to 1. And what happens in these systems and in these places where the opportunities are there for us to learn, to get the tools we need to reenter, is that it is with the lens of the male experience and not with the lens of the fact that I was a mother, that I was a daughter, that I had this intergenerational experience that I was also bringing in with me. My journey was not tailored. It was not part of that response. And not addressing the trauma. So the trauma piece or the survivor piece was never addressed. And so I spent a very long time learning to get the work skills, getting the education, finishing my education, and all of those things. And the core piece that kept me cycling in self-destructive behavior was never part of the conversation. And that was compounded by the fact that the reentry process was not also set up for me to bring my children with me. And this exacerbated the intergenerational trauma that I was experiencing, was now laid on top of my children because I was given a choice. Go to this place, get the tools that you need to re-enter society after your experiences in jail and prison and all the other things, or go be a mom. It was not both. And that fact, even though it was 18 years ago, to this day, still negatively impacts my children. And it negatively impacts my ability to try to help to stop the cycle of trauma, of abuse, of incarceration. And this is a very I think very much what fuels me in my work, that trauma-informed, gender-specific spaces, places, and responses are vital for women to succeed in changing their lives. Because if we can't be who we are and bring what we have experienced with us, then the time we spend working on it, we're just on pause, you see. Because I spent 12 years programming, but didn't start to address the core until I left the program. And I started to address the root issues. And once I started doing that, what do you know? I was able to keep a job. I was able to finish school. I was able to have the crucial conversations that need to start happening with all of the people that I hurt around me and start to work on healing the trauma, the intergenerational trauma, not only for myself, but for those that I love. And so that is what I would like to share with this group, that it is the sort of basic barriers that we all assume. But I think for women who are trying to re-enter after prison, we are bringing a lot more with us. And until we start to build the right response for what women need to re-enter, women are going to spend 12 years going through the motion and not getting what they need. So I really thank you for letting me share my story. Appreciate the conversation, and I'm looking forward to getting questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. You're such an inspiration. You're our local champion. In addition to being Vice President of Reentry and Public Affairs at Community Forward San Francisco, Rebecca is also chairing the Women Housing Coalition. And this is just one more thing that she's contributing, one more task that she daily carries for our community. Thank you so much, Rebecca. You laid wonderfully the foundation for our panel today. This is exactly where we need to start from. And now I want to move to the next panelist, and just looking for her to Andrea, you're the Director of Research, the Regilla Project at Stanford Criminal Justice Center. And I hope that you can speak about the groundbreaking research that you were leading with a colleague of yours from Stanford Criminal Justice Center. Can you please share with us the findings of the research and your analysis of these findings?
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
happy to. Thank you so much, Antonia, and thank you, Rebecca, for that really important context. I'm going to take a slight step back and talk a little bit about, and I have slides prepared, some of the reasons why women get involved and become incarcerated. So I'm presenting today findings from a study my co-author Debbie Mukamal and I published in September of 2023 called Fatal Peril: Unheard Stories from the IPV to Prison Pipeline. And like Allison said, women are the fastest growing segment of incarcerated people in the United States. There was a slight dip during COVID, but it has since rebounded. And in 2023, there were 91,000 women in state and federal prisons and about 95,000 women incarcerated in local jails. At the same time, 24 people are abused by an intimate partner every minute in the United States. That's according to the CDC. Some of these women will be killed by their intimate partner, and some of them will be arrested, convicted, and incarcerated for actions like homicide that arose out of their own victimization. And in many of these cases of survival, the criminal legal system really fails to account for intimate partner violence, or IPV. So despite research that says IPV accounts for 15% of all violent crimes, we actually know surprisingly little about women's experiences as murder and manslaughter defendants. And in fact, the impetus for this study came from this remark at a Stanford lecture from a reporter who said, "We don't actually know how many women are incarcerated for killing their abusive partner." So that's a bit about what our study sought to understand. We wanted to know these abuse-related pathways that lead to murder and manslaughter convictions, and we chose that because those are the longest, most serious crimes. And since we were based in California, we were able to sample the women who are in 2 of the women's prisons in California. So we really wanted to know what proportion of people incarcerated experienced IPV that year before the killing took place, how potentially lethal was that abuse, who was killed, what were the circumstances, and then in what ways did the criminal legal system take that IPV into account. So we administered an anonymous self-report survey. We actually did it in person in July and November 2023. And we collected responses from 649 people, which is over 58% of the target population. So those women incarcerated in California for murder and manslaughter defenses. So the sample demographics that we obtained really mirrored the larger prison population, and most of the respondents were serving indeterminate sentences averaging 25 years to life. And about
Andrea, I just want to give you a notice that the
slides are not changing.
PowerPoint, the slides do not change.
Yeah, I only have a couple prepared, but I
great,
changed
great.
that one. Yeah. So we used validated scales to assess for intimate partner violence and intimate partner homicide risk. These were the first time these measures were used in an incarcerated population. And then we also asked them who the decedent was, or the person who was killed. And we asked them if their incarceration had to do with domestic violence to please describe what happened. So briefly, we found that a high proportion of the sample experienced intimate partner violence the year before the killing, and most of them were at extreme risk for intimate partner homicide. And really that the lethality from that abuse extended beyond the person experiencing violence and really led to the death of children, strangers, and other bystanders. So our first aim was to examine how many people were experiencing IPV the year before the killing. And we used the composite abuse scale, or the CAS. And results here showed that 74% of the sample, or 464 women, were abused by an intimate partner the year before the killing. And in particular, about 87% experienced physical abuse, and 72% experienced both sexual and psychological abuse. About 50% experienced all types of intimate partner violence. The abused women then completed the danger assessment. This is a measure extensively used in domestic violence shelters and in with law enforcement to estimate your risk of being killed by an intimate partner. And it includes indicators of lethality that have been well established in research. So our results showed that about 2/3 of abused respondents were at extreme risk of intimate partner homicide that year before the killing. And actually, contrary to what we thought, this homicide risk wasn't higher among women who killed a partner. In fact, there were no differences by decedent type in this in homicide risk. So what that means is it didn't matter if a child was killed, a stranger was killed, everybody experiencing abuse, most of them were experiencing potentially lethal abuse that year before the killing. We then looked at the 464 women who experienced abuse, 24% of them were incarcerated or found responsible for the death of an intimate partner. Some of these killings were done in self-defense of themselves or their children. Some of them were also done by accident. But common among many of the women was this sense of fatal peril, which is the namesake of our study. And it's this persistent belief that their life was in danger, often from this accumulation of threats. Either the partner was threatening to kill the woman herself, her children, loved ones, or himself. And that really kept the woman in those abusive relationships. So this belief of fatal peril was really exacerbated by their inability to leave the relationship. So nearly half of them attempted to leave their partner the year before the killing, which is again a predictor of intimate partner homicide risk. But few of them were able to obtain assistance from law enforcement, and close to half said that their partner avoided being arrested the year before the killing. Among the handful that were able to leave, they said their partner stalked, tracked, kidnapped them, and brought them back to their abusive partners. Others had too few resources to leave, and others were afraid that their partner would challenge custody if they did leave. But it was more than just intimate partners that were killed. Indeed, 26% of the sample of abused women were convicted for killing a stranger, and 16% were convicted for the death of a child. These included vehicular homicides stemming from abuse that killed strangers or children. So we found actually 19 women were abusing or using substances and drugs and alcohol to cope with abuse, and then got into DUIs that killed a stranger or their own children. Some were even literally fleeing and then got to an accident and killed somebody. We also found a number of coercive controlled killings. So these were situations where the respondent felt forced by their partner to participate in robberies, carjackings, and other crimes that led to the death of a stranger. And then among child decedents, this included women in California who were convicted under a failure to protect liability law, in which they are held responsible for the killing committed by their partner. Some of our respondents said that they were found responsible for a killing their partner did while they were at work, while they were in another room. One was even unconscious from being strangled by her partner and then was incarcerated or found guilty because she should have known that, not to leave her child alone with this person who was abused. So again, in other words, we found really that this lethal IPV creates dangerous circumstances that isn't limited to the relationship. It's those people around them as well. When we examined the types of violence our respondents experienced, we were really surprised by the frequency of strangulation. So about 60% of our sample were strangled or choked by their partner. And 78% of those who were choked said they were choked multiple times or until they were dizzy, passed out, or blacked out. These are signs of a probable traumatic brain injury. A TBI is like an injury to the brain or the head or the neck that leads to problems like speaking, understanding information, memory loss, personality changes, and so forth. Given these effects, women with a TBI who are trying to navigate a criminal legal system, this system that, really requires them to have good memory, consistent stories, it makes it really challenging for IPV survivors to navigate. And strangulation isn't the only way to get a TBI. Punches to the face, head, neck, and jaw are other ways. We just didn't ask if they lost consciousness, so we believe the rate is likely higher than what we found. The other important fact is that physical injuries often lead survivors to go to the emergency department or medical professionals where they get linked with DV services. Only 25% of our respondents said they saw a doctor for an injury, and 50% said they needed to see a doctor but didn't go. So a really important pathway to getting help that wasn't available to these women. So we have many more results than what I can share with you today. You can find our report. It's about 200 pages long. Sorry about that, but it's really rich detail. You can access it through this QR code. And yeah, we really want to say that potentially lethal IPV is common among women who are incarcerated for homicide. And there are all these collateral homicides that we're not really looking at. And that many women have TBIs, and that really affects how they're treated throughout the criminal legal system, from, police all the way to parole. And we need to be paying attention to that. I leave it to the next presenter, but I'm happy to answer any questions you have at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I cannot imagine how we would be able to plan action locally without this research. Your data, your analysis, it really lays foundation for future action. And action, we say, even in the title of this event, is very important for us. This transitions me to the next speaker. And I'm so pleased to invite a local and national champion in action. So, Sunny, you created so many programs. You're not just a writer advocate, but you're nationally recognized leader in programming. I will give the floor to you to speak about all these important programs. And I know you still work on many of them. You're not just the creator, you're the day-to-day force for these programs. Thank you so much, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Antonia, for that generous shout out. I appreciate it. Andrea and Rebecca, mad respect for what you have presented. Thank you very much. And good morning, afternoon, evening to everybody. I have had the good fortune as well as the heartache to work in criminal justice since 1980 as a law student, as a lawyer for the Sheriff's Department, and then a brief time in private practice. And the bulk of my work since 1990 was creating programs for incarcerated men and women and post-release, as Antonio shared. I worked for a sheriff. If anyone told me I worked in the Sheriff's Department for 32 years, I'd say they're smoking something very bad. I did because I worked for a very forward-thinking, good-hearted man named Michael Hennessy, who believed that it was our moral and professional obligation to run a safe, secure, and contextually humane jail and prepare folks more so when they get released than when they came in. So we did. We created recovery programs for men and women. We created a violence prevention program that used the principles of restorative justice in 1997, where we provided a very rigorous curriculum for batterers inside. And in the spirit and the mandate of restorative justice and the principle, created programs for their victim survivors, practical and emotional support. We also created a charter high school for incarcerated adults, as 70% of the men and women in our custody were high school dropouts, as well as an average reading level of about 4th to 6th grade. Yes, we had programs for women, but I have to tell on myself, I too unintentionally neglected really a much more comprehensive approach for incarcerated women. Yes, we had a gender-specific program called the Sister Project for women. That was one of our first quasi-therapeutic communities in the county jail. Nonetheless, it wasn't good enough. As Rebecca talked about, okay, now where do we go? And when we do go, the male-dominated system was so suppressive. I don't walk in Rebecca's shoes, but I can see it and feel it as a woman and a hardcore feminist, proud feminist as well. That said, a lot of us, unintentionally, I think, as one warden, a very progressive warden at CIW, California Institute of Women, years ago, named Dawn Davison, said, it's the tyranny of numbers. Well, it's a tyranny of numbers, and I would add the tyrannies of sexism as well. I had my consciousness raised pretty quickly when an elected official called me up, elected official here in California named Fiona Ma, and said, Sonny, there are women, as Andrea pointed out, and I was on a major learning curve. There are women who are serving life, long-term sentences, life without the possibility of parole, for simply defending themselves or coerced to be at the scene of the crime. And there's legislation that has been passed, and she was part of one piece of legislation. And the women are now, the criminalized survivors are starting to trickle out. Well, I went good and crazy, and she said, but they're inappropriately placed. Again, as Rebecca mentioned, they're placed in drug treatment. Well, thank goodness for drug treatment. That's not to denigrate drug treatment. But one size doesn't fit all. And the women that she talked about, some of them had past prior drug, alcohol issues, some did not. But nonetheless, they were placed in drug treatment where they're up and ready to go at 6 o'clock, and the very classic thing of blackouts, no contact with the outside world, etc. These were women who were profoundly physically, emotionally, sexually abused and have been in prison for decades. We had one from the 1960s. We had a woman 85 years old come out. And so she said, would you be willing to open up a home? And that's trauma informed, that's gender specific and centric. And frankly, I didn't know the first thing about housing, but one of the programs I founded was called 5 Keys. And that was the charter high school that expanded into the 5 Keys are education, employment, family, recovery, and community. And it expanded way beyond education to housing and the other issues that women and men struggle with to become integrated into our society. So with Fiona's advocacy and went to the board and said, this is not even a discussion. We have to open up this home. Well, we didn't have a nickel in our budget, but it didn't matter. We figured it out. And we're still figuring out, frankly. So we opened up a place. We now have up to modestly 10 women. And it is our manager right now was also life without the possibility of parole, that she never even committed the crime. She was in for 28 years, I believe. And we have a very small, mighty staff that are so passionate and working with the women coming into it's called 5 Keys Home Free. And it's everything from just a safe place, as well as how do I take the bus? How do I deal with this? What is this phone? Because many of the women have never even touched that. Can you imagine coming into the 21st century? So those little things, as well as bigger things like financial literacy, transitional employment, just so they have a safe place where they can sleep with both eyes closed for the first time in decades. We are currently now partnering also with our local district attorney's office, who likewise has a survivor victim division. And housing is a very painful commodity here. And we are going to partner with them, with the survivors that they have, and provide practical and emotional support as well as housing. the study, when we first started with Andrea, what Andrea and Debbie, her colleague, did, I mean, one of the things we kept writing grants and talking to private foundations. Well, how many women are we talking about? We just had anecdotal information. But thankfully, Andrea and Debbie, we now have those statistics that certainly verify and validate what we've always known as well. I'm gonna I feel like this quote from Dostoevsky. I have shared it before in general context, but I think it's certainly apropos here when he wrote in his book, The House of the Dead. He said, the degree of civilization in a society can be judged by entering its prisons. Well, I'm going to add, because I think that is true, that the treatment of incarcerated women and how we support them when they return says everything about who we are as a global community. So with that, we can do much better. And many of us I know here are committed and passionate to make sure that women come out with pride, culture, and dignity. And with that, I will end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sunny. What an inspiration you are. Just like all the rest of our panelists.
Right.
You did so much for our community and so much for women and men, and for the healing and re-entry. We're so grateful for all your work, and I cannot wait to hear also the questions to you. Well, we built our house almost fully by these 3 presentations, but we still need to hear a little bit more about the contact between those that work with women formerly and currently incarcerated and the women. What are their stories? What the caseworker can see, and what are the important parts of the work of a caseworker? Rui, you're the next speaker, and you have been working with women not only as solicitor, but currently and for a long time at the Women's Center in Brighton. Can you please speak about your interaction with these women, where you see the help is needed, and what are the important factors that you notice, the root causes that you have been able to assess just by working with these women? The floor is yours. Rui, you're muted.
Goodness, I'm so sorry. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, my co-panelists, my co-speakers. I'm from across the pond, so my experiences, my professional knowledge will be slightly different, but you know what is coming through is the shared knowledge, the shared experiences, whether you're in the States, whether you're in the UK, whether you're in Australia, it's a common thread. So a little bit about me, and then I'll tell you about my work. So I work at Brighton Women's Centre, and as Antonia explained, I am a qualified solicitor, and I now work with women coming out the criminal justice system. I work in a project called Care Not Custody, because this is what women need. They need support, and I will go on to explain a little bit more about that in a second. The project I work with is women focused, it's holistic, it's trauma informed. We never judge, we never put words into women's mouths. We let them tell their stories It may come, it's never in a straight linear line. It's all over the place. You need patience, you need understanding. And I salute every single woman that I have worked with, because their stories are humbling and they are here to tell me their stories. So my input for this afternoon, or sorry, it's afternoon here, morning, evening, wherever you are in the world, is to explain very briefly why women commit these crimes. Now, some of it will have been touched on by my colleagues this afternoon. I'm sorry for having to repeat, but I think it'll give context anyway. So basically, it's broadly speaking, women commit crimes out of need rather than greed. And in my work experience, and with the support that I have given, you can see that female, I say the word reluctantly, offenders, for want of a better word at the moment, differ from their male counterparts in criminal behaviour, yet their subsequent treatment at the hands of the criminal justice system in an attempt to correct or punish is with methods designed for men. And in my experience, working with women who are caught up in this really murky world, the behaviour can be seen in three parts: what causes a woman to offend, the punishment or treatment of women once within the criminal justice system, and the efforts made to rehabilitate them back into mainstream society. For this purpose, I will consider the first part, what causes women to offend in the first place. It's never simple. These things are never simple. It's not as black and white as some commentators would like to think. What does cause a woman to offend? They commit crimes out of need, not out of greed. They're very often the main carer for dependents, particularly children. They will commit crimes to obtain basic foodstuffs, provisions, and it's basic survival. Conversely, men commit through crimes through greed, violence and bravado being hallmarks of their criminal activity. And can I just say as well, I'm really sorry if my thanks go out to Rebecca. If I'm talking clinically, it's because I'm talking not from personal experience, but from someone who has worked. So I'm almost like a third party, but I speak with the heart of someone who has worked with these women. So the sorts of crimes that women tend to commit and to be incarcerated for tend to be low level, non-violent, such as shoplifting, breach of bail conditions, soliciting for sexual favors. Again, these are all means for survival. And rather than coming down, rather than supporting a woman, rather than understanding, the judiciary, the law enforcers, society, they condemn. And I think that's where we differ from these institutions in the Women's Centre, because we are not there to condemn. In fact, very often we are the first port of call for these women to open up and to hear their stories. And as has been touched on before, significantly, the women who commit these very low-level crimes will be suffering from mental health issues themselves, such as PTSD, schizophrenia, mood disorders, conditions that should be treated. They'll often be under the burden of historic trauma caused by sexual, physical violence or other abuse. And as again has been touched on, this trauma and mental health remains largely untreated and will affect both how the woman behaves in terms of criminality and how she reacts to the punishment meted out in consequence, punishment that is often disproportionate to the crime that she has committed. And rather than punish these women, they need intervention and counselling at this point. Again, to repeat what my colleagues have said this afternoon, the misuse of drugs and alcohol is a feature among these women that I've supported who commit crimes. They are substances that are used to take away the pain of trauma, together with dealing with current issues. It's a coping mechanism. But such women are viewed dimly by society, by the judiciary, by law enforcement, by their neighbours, by whoever, the tabloid newspapers, who expect an unrealistic view of women, who have an unrealistic view of women and expect a higher moral conduct. And if I can just give an anecdote, years ago, when I was defending a woman who committed such a low level crime, it's hardly worth recalling. I think it was shoplifting of something tiny. And the judge, he looked over his glasses at her and he said, "I'm going to teach you a lesson." And even as a young lawyer, I just thought, good heavens, what lesson are you going to teach her by sending her to jail? And I think that was a turning point for me, which is how I ended up working eventually in women's centres. And, obtaining drugs or alcohol as well via criminal transactions to help deal with trauma and pain is again another source of condemnation. And also from my experience, women are triggered by situations, memories, and so on that make them commit crimes. Nobody commits crimes for the fun of it. There's a rationale behind it. And with the women we work with, mental ill health and all these other issues that they're dealing with, substance misuse, emotional abuse, poor finances, poor education, learning disabilities, the list is endless, poor housing. These add to it. Certainly in the UK, but I think in other countries too, women tend to have shorter sentences for these crimes, but this simply creates a revolving door. So they're incarcerated, then they're released, and they're back to square one with no housing, with no job, with no future. So they commit another petty crime and they're back in again. It's intergenerational and intersectional. It's never ending. And again, this is where women's centres come in, because we try to give them support, we try to give them hope, we try to support them with education, with getting a job, with getting a house, with, so some of the women we've worked with, some of the women I've worked with have lost their children. And when that happens, how do you console a woman whose child is up for adoption because she stole a bottle of wine? It's mind-boggling. Other factors that make women commit crimes, poor job opportunities, poor finances, lack of education. They tend not to be violent. They should not be incarcerated. And to sort of flesh it out and to give this a sort of 3D perspective, rather than talking clinically, I want to tell you of a couple of cases, real cases, where I worked with women, and I think it was Sunny who said that that the women that who are incarcerated tend to be victims of crimes perpetrated by someone who's created something, who's done something worse against them. So these are a couple of examples. So I worked with a woman who, when she was 18, 20, she got raped by her brother-in-law. And she told nobody, and she kept it within her. He moved away with his wife, her sister, and she tried to get on with her life. He returned after 20 years. And on meeting her, he leaned over her and whispered in her ear, first time that they have connected. And he whispered, "Do you remember what I did to you?" She went over the edge. She was triggered, traumatized, re-traumatized, and stole a few bottles of wine from the local supermarket, got completely drunk, was arrested, charged, and imprisoned. And when I worked with her, she couldn't even lift her head from the floor. She mumbled. She had no job. She had no hope. No, she didn't have her own place. She was working. Sorry, she was living with her mum. She was on benefits. She had no belief in herself. Her whole perspective on life, on the criminal justice system, was destroyed. She finally told her mother what happened. And I think I was the third person as well that she confided in as to what happened. Again, this is someone who needs therapy, not the full weight of the law. You know, what has made someone who's had no involvement behave like this suddenly? Again, there was a young woman that I was working with, early 20s. She was going to a party with a male friend, and during the walk, he tried to sexually assault her. She defended herself, but she was charged with assault and imprisoned. And she was not going to engage with me at first because she didn't trust anybody. She said, I was defending myself. I've kept out the expletives. I was defending myself, and I'm the one that goes to jail, and he gets away. Again, someone who needs therapy. And a final one is I work with an older lady in her mid-50s, a widow, a grandmother. She's gotten to this point of her life. She's never had any involvement with the police, never involvement with the judiciary, the police, the law enforcers, whoever. She formed a relationship with a man who love bombed her, and he was everything she'd hoped for. She let him move in with her, and then his behavior changed. She saw the darker side. And he was physically abusive. He made her commit benefits crimes. When she refused at first, he beat her up. So she committed a crime, and she thought, I remember her telling me, she thought that she would be found innocent, so much so that she just parked her car in the car park of the courts because she thought she was going to be coming home. And she was the one who went to prison, and she said her partner sat in the public gallery looking down, smiling. Yeah, never in being involved with the criminal justice system. So what am I saying with all of this is look at the history, look at what these women have experienced, do some background checks, do some digging, don't look at the superficial, and do what we're doing at the law at the Women's Centre. Give them hope. And if a woman needs to be imprisoned, then we should be following the Bangkok rules, or to give it its full title, United Nations Rules for the Treatment of Women Prisoners and Custodial Measures for Women Offenders. The Bangkok rules, it talks about how women should be treated in prison, health care, maternity care, opportunities for training, education. And although there are many countries that are signatories to this, including the UK, we fall far short of what is expected. In fact, if anything, almost comically, we think we are trailblazers when we build prisons with creches. Which mother wants to bring her child up in a prison? It's ridiculous. So that's me in a whistle-stop tour. This is just a whistle-stop overview, and I'm happy to go through any of these individual points in more depth. As I say, my perspective is from a caseworker, and these are the stories that I'm sharing with you of the women that I've worked with. So thank you, Antonia, for allowing me to speak.
Thank you so much, Ruhia. You finished the building, and now we'll look in some details with the help of our speakers. and our audience. The the chat is open. You can put your questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand electronically because I won't be able to see you otherwise, and start with your questions. But before that, I want to use my privilege as a moderator and start the questions with a question to Andrea. Andrea, you spoke about this, but I hope you can elaborate more. What intimate partner violence assessments or traumatic brain injury screenings do you recommend based on the analysis of the data that you collected?
Yeah, so our study used the composite abuse scale. It's about 16 to 20 items. It's pretty detailed because we wanted to understand the dynamics of the relationship, but I do recommend a quick screening. It's called HITS, which stands for hurt, insult, threaten, scream. It's just 4 questions, and the respondent answers on like a never to frequently occurring scale. If how often does your partner hurt you, insult you, and so forth. So that's a really quick screening that you can do. We also use the danger assessment. That's a 20 item. It also includes like a calendar portion that assesses risk for intimate partner homicide. That score, the instrument itself is free. You can search on dangerassessment.org or just look for danger assessment PDF and you'll find it. The weighted scoring for that is reserved for certified assessors. So there's a short online training, you pay $25 and you become certified, but you can still access the questions. And if they say yes, there's like a crude cutoff, then they're at risk for intimate partner homicide. There's also a 5 item version of the DA. It's called DA Danger Assessment 5. It's 5 questions that are used a lot in healthcare settings or criminal justice settings, again, as a quick screen for intimate partner homicide risk. And then finally, for TBI, another quick screening, it's called HELPS. And that stands for, have you been hit on the head, the H? Were you ever seen in an emergency room because of the injury? The L is, did you ever lose consciousness, which is that key indicator for traumatic brain injury. You don't only have to lose consciousness, you can feel dizzy or things like that. They've sort of changed how they define TBI now. And then the P for HELPS is, how did that injury affect you? So like what problems? Did you have headaches, dizziness, anxiety, depression, and so forth? And then the S for HELPS is about significant sicknesses. So you can actually overdose and not have oxygen to your brain and get a traumatic brain injury. You can be strangled and get a traumatic brain injury. There are like meningitis and strokes and seizures. Those can also cut off oxygen and give you a brain injury. So the HELPS screening tool is, again, another quick, free, easy to use assessment for TBI. Thank you for your question. And I'll just add, while we're waiting for other questions, that we, in our study, we really recommend that across the criminal legal system, if you ever have a woman who is accused of a homicide offense, to do these assessments. It's so rare for women to be murder or manslaughter defendants that, we really should be thinking about, does this person have intimate partner violence in their background? Because as our study in California and then a subsequent study we're releasing later this year in Illinois, and everybody in the chat who shared their experiences in the UK and Canada, like an overwhelming majority of people who are incarcerated have histories of intimate partner violence. So we really have to be thinking about that. Over.
You're on mute, Antonia.
Sorry about that. So we have a comment in the chat linking criminality among women to human trafficking and speaking about the difficulties to get to the human trafficking link. And maybe, Sunny, you can elaborate a little bit more how the programs that you helped create specifically in the jail. I remember the connection with SAGE and their programming, how we can be better in us getting to this problem in the past or as direct cause of criminality.
Yeah, well, human trafficking, or I actually say human slavery, trafficking. Always, I understand the concept, but it's we don't specifically focus on it, but certainly it's part and parcel of the dehumanization and the total ignoring of that horror. I'm happy to say that in our 5 Keys Home Free, our manager who's managing it, who spent 28 years, as I mentioned earlier, for a crime she didn't do. She was trafficked when she was 14 years old. And her trafficker, her abuser, committed the crime while she was in the car. And those wounds, every day is therapy for her. And that's the thing that I think is important. It's not a one-off for a lot of the women inside and women who never experience incarceration but have experienced trauma, is that every day, in her words too, every day is therapy. Every day is an opportunity to heal. And there's no formula per se about that. It like I said before, one size doesn't fit all. Some women really resonate with a community and a group. Some need one-on-one counseling. So what we try to provide is all of the above. We're not there yet, frankly. We're still a work in progress. But I think it's really important to recognize that we need a multi-modality approach. And I think there's some folks here who are in the community working on legislation as well as direct service. But that's something that, what we're talking about is the quintessential feminist project within the criminal legal system. I have never felt so passionate, and I've been a passionate person working with incarcerated folks, but this is the quintessential feminist program. Go ahead. I think Rebecca has her hand up.
Rebecca has, and Rebecca, when you speak on this question, maybe you can address also training of all these professionals, especially in the criminal justice system, working with women.
Yeah, that's the piece that I wanted to lift up, is where is the net where we catch? And so just like saying about what Andrea was saying about the assessment. So what Community Forward does, just as an example, is that we collaborate with our local prison, with our local sheriff's department, and we as a community-based organization provide domestic violence services inside the jail. And it's a collaboration where any woman is identified as being any type of survivor of DV, HT, sexual assault, doesn't matter. Our organization is called, and we are the first to interact before they're even charged. Like they haven't even gotten charged. They're just, as soon as they're in there, there's an immediate touch point with people who know what it means, like what this impact could have on the woman themselves. And then even for the women that are incarcerated, we're inside the jail providing vital groups like seeking safety and healthy relationships. So what we're doing is, even inside the incarcerated place, is providing the tools that women need to be able to sort of even think about moving on. And I just, and then we're there for when they get out, right? With the multiple sort of services. But the law enforcement, our partners in law enforcement, it isn't their wheelhouse. It isn't their expertise, but there is a level of expectation of at least having a little bit of like competency. And I'm really sorry to say that, but we expect that at the emergency room in the doctors too, right? The emergency room doctors, they come in, women go in there, their abusers with them, and so our collective groups are working to sort of like partner with the hospitals, partner with the sheriff's department, partner with other co-ed serving facilities to bring that lens in, so that, when people are working with women, they can put these glasses on and look at the women that they're serving through this possible lens. And then I'm just going to pull up one more thing, and that is for us in the United States, definitely in California, that we're working to remove the silos. So what's so frustrating about trying to like create new legislation or advocate, right, for the right services or for the right training is that we love to put them in silos. So, hi, Rebecca. Oh, you're human trafficking. You only belong over there. Oh, hi, Rebecca. You were abused by your husband. Then you only go there. Oh, hi, Rebecca. You're unhoused living on the street and you were sexually assaulted by a stranger. Then you can only get services there. And it's frustrating because we need a wider net to catch any woman who has experienced trauma of any kind and catch them, right? And then we be the experts to see where are they funneled to get the specific right services that they need. So what happens for us is that we have these silos, and then women, they fall through the cracks, you see, because the services or the funding or the money, and we're really trying to break that down and just really create a wider net for women. Anyway, so I didn't mean to get off on a tangent about our local sort of problems, but I do think that that is something that I just want to lift up, that survivors shouldn't be put into pockets, right? Or to get a jacket put on them.
Yeah, I really want to echo what Rebecca is saying. For some reason, we have this tendency to think of them as separate phenomena, like trafficking victims versus intimate partner violence victims, but there is an overlap between them. A man can abuse their partner in a way that it is by sexually exploiting him. And in that case, he's actually farming out the abuse to other people and gaining from it financially. Like, we really, Rebecca got the nail on the head. Like, we have to stop treating them as separate phenomena. This is all about women's oppression and male sexual proprietariness. Yeah.
And could I just add, as maybe I'm going off at tangent, but I think it's still an important point, is that some of the services that work with the women that I work with, they need to be educated and enlightened too. I told you just when I was giving my little presentation how we work with women, trying to support them and to be non-judgmental. I know that our local police officers view our service as tea and biscuits. That's about as damaging and as derogatory as you can hope for. If your police and whoever else is out there just sees us as some sort of, coffee morning, actually we're doing fundamental work. So it's not just being in silos. Let's change the mindset and let's change the language of how we're supporting women.
And I see very important point brought by Marian Belker She is a commissioner in the International Alliance of Women. She's also a member of the European Women's Lobby of the board. She brings this point that very often women put themselves in front of the men because of love or because of abuse or because this is the father of their children. Maybe Andrea can tell us if the research in some way was reflecting this fact.
Yeah, I didn't get to share today, but there was this incredible story of one survivor who was talking about how she came home and her husband was giving her grief about being on Facebook and like slammed her to the ground, and then her child came in and he threw the child and the child's head was bleeding, and then he ended up strangling her, and then the second child came in and he threw her and that child was injured too. One of the children then grabbed a knife and put it in the mom's hand. She was being suffocated. She couldn't see, crying, struggling to breathe. She didn't know what happened, but she, came to and saw her hands were bloody and there was a knife. And as he's laying there dying, she says to him, I forgive you for everything you did. Like, it's okay. So you really have to understand that, women want the violence to stop. It's not necessarily that they want to always leave their partner, and that it definitely happens that they will put themselves in front of the abuser or support the abuser because they want it to stop. We just don't have good programs to teach men how to behave and teach people what it's like to have a healthy relationship.
Metka Potočik is asking about use of art and music in the programs. Can somebody respond about that, Sunny?
It's a really important, that's what I mean by multimodality, we have education, we have music therapy, art therapy. Some people don't want to express words, but they can via a variety of artistic art mediums, whether it's music, sculpture, painting, singing, and it moves mountains. And unfortunately, in this country, in the States, art is so minimized. And so, oh yeah, those flaky artists. Oh my God, we had drama art for our violence prevention program. Was one of the most powerful initiatives where we had formerly abusive men who went through our rigorous program, side by telling their stories of how they stopped their violence, how their attitudes, the male role violence and their attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors fueled their violence and their accountability to it, as well as the stories of survivors where the men were, it was a way of fostering not only empathy, but empowering the women by telling their stories in a way that brought them, for the first time, as they reported, for the first time, a sense of dignity and a sense of pride. And so it was really, as well as the audience to hear the voices of those who have struggled and have come to a place of unequivocal accountability as well as unequivocal pride for surviving and able to walk tall as a result and be functional women and members of our community. So art is essential.
It's a blessing.
And a blessing.
That we all have. Well, Kathleen Douglas brings a focus on Indigenous women. She's in Ontario, and she's telling us that they have programs focused specifically on Indigenous women. And maybe we can have one or two of you to address this important part that we have to produce culturally informed programs and how we try the best for the different minorities. In California, minorities are majority, so it looks like this is the majority of our work. Would some of you jump on bringing some information about that?
Well, I'll say how important cultural competency is. When we bring women in to give them the services they need to be seen, not just for their gender, but, in our jail system, African American women are disproportionately represented. And that's true with how many survive violence here too. But we have very few programs that are tailored to speak to their experience, historical experience. And we're working really, really hard. That's true for our immigrant women. It's true for our indigenous women. And we have to really, really fight hard for culture to shine through when we're trying to fight every day just for our sex to shine through. So it's just an interesting and very important thing. And I think we try to do a good job of having culturally competent resources, but we are busy in the fight, just trying to make women be seen. And I love someone put in the chat around the work around veterans. And that is something that we are constantly using that in our advocacy, that we know from the work that has been done with veterans, that when you focus on a specific population, you focus on what their specific needs are, the success rates explode. And so if we can get women, and yes, but cultural competency is very important. I see Marianne has their hand up.
Go ahead, Maria.
It is very important to hear what you said, because I'm not really busy with women in prison, but before, it is very important to protect them from being imprisoned, to become criminalized. It is very important to do education training for police and justice or judiciary systems. And this means also together with being accompanied by the anti-discrimination agencies or by everything under the anti-violation against women and girls law, like in Europe, the Istanbul Convention, or you have other laws or human rights. And everyone in the police maybe has to be skilled. We have studies, they say they are not skilled on sexual violence. And they say, oh, this woman tells us we should file this case for her. And no, she is mentally sick. She is crazy. She is, go away. And especially they are more discriminatory against vulnerable groups and minority groups. Something maybe indigenous people in Canada or US or somewhere else, but also any other minority groups. For example, if it is a woman with disability or of a kind of minority, whatever. And there is something we approach now, the police unions, or there is an organization in Germany, Better Police. They want to establish something to improve police. And there's something else from CEDAW, which says that in all decision-making units and everywhere, there should be parity of women. And I think if these institutions will be in parity led also by half of the women who are skilled much more or more trained or more aware of violence against women and what can happen if the women are not protected, this might change it. And I think globally we have to change this with these institutions, especially police can't be a male force, because sometimes they protect the perpetrators instead of the women.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Maybe we can later on discuss this together or join and merge our trainings or measures you do.
Yeah.
So it's very important even for other regions in the world to hear what you say.
I know we're done. I just want to thank you for that, Marion. I want to underscore how critical that is. Working in law enforcement for over 32 years. And while we were working and providing programs for incarcerated folks and our violence prevention program with batterers who have done horrible, unspeakable things to women, meanwhile, the deputy sheriffs are in there and they could be, and I'm not pie in the sky because I have seen it, they can be tremendous role models. Does it happen now? Few and far between, I'm sorry to say, but there were moments in time where we did comprehensive training. And it's frankly also about leadership. If you have a sheriff, or what the equivalent, leadership is everything. And how do we do that? Well, here we vote or we call them out or whatever it takes. But what you bring up, I think, is critical. While we have these things called jails and prisons, it could be a moment in time where we really shift the climate. Without the right leadership, though, that's another story. But thank you for bringing that up.
And this is a great way to conclude. All of you today speaking for us are leaders, and the women in our meeting are leaders in their communities. We are proud of all of you. We are deeply grateful that you joined us today for this important conversation. Thank you to our great speakers. And thank you to the audience. We invite you to join us for our event tomorrow at the same time, 12:30 New York time. I added the link to register for the event in the chat. The event will be focused on trafficked women and girls and services beyond the rescue, because the important story starts after the rescue, when we have to be there for them and help them. Just similarly to what we do for post-incarcerated women. Thank you again, and good events to those that are still in New York and will be going to other events today. Thank you, Sunny. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Andrea.